based on the answers, most of the prepared questions, although some of them have been asked, but they have been answered. So what we'll do is I will go to the audience questions, and there are many, many of them, and I will group them. The most concern that people seem to have, as this crowd is, seems to be obviously against SEA 5, is what is the political process and how does it work? Where does it go next? And if you should be opposed or support this, this proposal, where do you go next? Now everybody keep quiet now. I don't want a lot of noises here. We have like 10 people here. Who's going to kick you out if you start making noise? They're big. I think this will be appropriate for Senator Huff to address.
So this passed out of the Senate toward the end of January. So now it is in the Assembly. And there's been some comments that the author could bring it back, and he originally said he would, then he said he wouldn't. He can't bring it back. He has no authority. The Senate, once it goes to the Assembly, it's there. Now, Rules Committee will determine, and I hope I'm right in all this stuff, but generally I'm fairly accurate. Rules will determine which committee path it will go. It did like 3 committees in the Senate, and it will likely have a similar amount in the Assembly, but not necessarily. If they decided they just wanted to warp it, as they call it, without reference to file and plop it right up on the Assembly floor to vote on it, they could do that. But let's assume that's not going to happen for the sake of argument. So we need to pay attention to what committees it's assigned to. And then when they have those committees, they are publicly noticed in some fashion. And you have an opportunity at the end of that to speak for or against, and typically the author will have some speakers for, and then there will be opponents there that have equal time. And then usually, if you have a large number of people, you don't get an opportunity to say much other than I agree with the bill or I don't agree with the bill. But each public committee, you'll have an opportunity to say something. Then it will go to the floor of the Assembly where you don't have an opportunity to say anything. It's all done by then. And then it needs to pass on a supermajority vote. The Democrats control more than 2. They have like 56 votes right now. They need 54, or they have 55. They need 54 to make it pass. They have 2 surplus. You pull off 2 Democrat votes, you can defeat this. It's as simple as that.
Fairly straightforward fact. Just as a background, so that you understand how these things work, is as Senator Huff said, it needs to go through committees. Committees are usually made of a smaller number of people, although usually the majority party controls the committee votes. And it's a majority vote, it's not a 2/3 vote, so generally speaking, if the Speaker of the Assembly agrees for a certain bill, it does not face much opposition in committees, unless it's super, super controversial sometimes. So it will come to the Assembly floor. As Senator Huff said, there is no timing. We don't really know. It could be very fast. It could take a very long time. And a lot of that depends on the will of the Assembly Speaker, who is essentially the leader, who controls where the Assembly members sits in their offices, whether in the basement or overlooking the lawn, and also whether they become committee chairs or they will be minions in little bitty nothing committees. So, therefore, the committee speaker has a tremendous amount of power. In the Assembly, there are also caucuses. There's caucuses, of course, there are parties, but there are caucuses of special interest. And the racial caucuses are the Hispanic, the Asian, and the Black caucuses. And, of course, there are many more members in the Hispanic caucus than there are Asian caucus. The Asian caucus has 8 members right now, 4 of whom are Chinese American. And one of them is here, not present here, but represents District Mr. Paul Fong. So if you want to give feedback, it's probably best to give to people who can make a difference, who will be Assembly members. Whether you're for or against this proposal, give them a call. Email is better than email. Email's okay. Fax probably better because you can't get through on the line sometimes. Sometimes you just get mad at you and tell you to shut up. But anyway. The protest, as part of the American democracy process, it happens. I would suggest everybody stay calm during the protest. Do not, attack anybody. No violence. It's against the law to be breaking people's windows or spray paint on their offices. Remember, these are also people that you have elected. Paul Fong is elected out of this district. A lot of them are Chinese Americans here. So be sure that you voice your opinion as a voter, and that's what a PAPA is for. If you're not registered, be sure you get registered. If you're registered, be sure to vote. I have run many campaigns before. The very first thing you do is go to the voter data and see who has the most power, bringing the most votes. And both in terms of registered voter as well as who voted. We do data screenings, look at frequent voters, usually 4 out of 5 the 5 elections. And if you voted, we knock on your door, ask for your opinion. If you didn't vote, I'm sorry, you don't count. So no matter what the numbers are here, if you don't vote, you don't register, you don't count in this country. Okay, so please do so in the future. Now, we're sort of on the subject of politics. There are actually quite a few people who ask political questions, and I'm venturing into very dangerous ground here, so careful. What is the politics around this issue? It breaks open right around Chinese New Year's, just before midterm election primary. It may affect many seats. Asian Americans, only some 14% of the population. Probably, I haven't studied this, only 8 or 9% of the voting public, but it does wield power in certain districts. How does the political, what is the political landscape? How is SCA going to affect politics in this election this year? Let's try, Henry, you hardly ever start first. Be mindful of time, please.
Yeah, okay. I feel that the debate around this has gotten hyper emotional in some ways, which is unfortunate. As a Chinese parent, my wife and I, we raised 3 kids. They all went through the UC system. Like many of you, you worry about them doing well in school, or do well enough, I should say, to get into the UCs or any other school. And I fully understand the concern that families, and some of you feel that this may be a quota against Chinese, that somehow or another the roadblock is going to stop. Again, if the language in this SCA had the word quota or parity, I would be against it. I think what we need to understand is we want educational opportunities for all, and we don't want to see, I would hate to see our community being used politically for some other kind of agenda. I think it's really important for us to look at UC and the CSUs, who's being admitted, who's eligible, and do we have enough resources to serve all those who deserve to be admitted to our great universities. Because the master plan was a very good plan that was developed in 1960. Unfortunately, we have lost the public will, and politicians have not stepped up to the plate to honor the master plan for higher education in California. And I think that's regrettable, because again, we end up fighting for what we perceive to be diminishing opportunities, when we should go the other way and expand opportunities for all. We should be spending more on education than on prisons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would the Senator like to address this issue? You're that senator in the politics. By the way, Senator Huff's district abuts Senator Hernandez, just east of this.
Yes, it does. It's hard to know what the politics of the process is. When I was in local government for 9 years, we were nonpartisan. We just got stuff done. And then you get up in Sacramento and everything takes on a partisan tone. And sometimes it shouldn't. Certainly our education should not be a political football that we throw back and forth at election time. But it appears that's what this has done. And I would guess from looking at previous elections that parties look for issues that they can help drive out voters that they think will help them in the polls. So for a little history, whoever controls the White House in a second term, their party tends to lose offices nationwide, which includes California. We're going to have a governor that's running for his 4th term. While we all like Governor Brown, he doesn't inspire passion because it's the same thing as what we got for the last 4 years. So there's not a lot to drive out Democrat voters, and yet you have very important elections up. So somebody looks back in their magic hat of tricks and sees an issue that was passed back during probably a Republican governor's time, and they look at the data on this, and when you look at Prop 209, African Americans opposed Prop 209 in the 70 percentiles. Latinos opposed it in the 70 percentiles. Asian Americans supported or opposed it in the lower 60 percentiles, about 61% or so as I recall. It's a little fuzzy off my mind. So they look back at this and say, these are our constituencies. Here's an issue where we can drive them to the polls. I'm purely speculating, I want to be very clear on it, but that's how things work in Sacramento. They didn't anticipate that since 1996 and 2014 that our Asian population is more politically astute, that many of you have come to this country looking for educational opportunity, and that by reversing the racial protection found in Prop 209, it actually flies in the face of the very motivation of the whole thing you were trying to do to help your kids excel in this very competitive state, national, and global economy.
Thank you, Senator Huff.
You know, I teach history, American history at UC Berkeley for 40 years. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, how to deal with SC5, I'd like all of us to reflect upon history, where we have come from, and from whom we have derived a lot of benefits and help. You know, we were all victims of racial discrimination up until the 1960s. And as I said earlier, that a lot of the universities closed their doors to minorities and women up until then. And who will keep the door open so that we can enter? And once we enter, if we succeed, let us not forget other people who have helped us, to given us the opportunity and help us succeed. There's a Chinese saying, 饮水思源，饮水思源. You got to remember where we have come from, and also I think we have an obligation, just as pure and simple American, that we want to be helpful to other people who are less advantageous than we are. And as a result of our benefit from what had happened in the civil rights movement, I think we ought to be mindful that there are still a lot of unfortunate and less advantaged people around us, and that we need to also consider their opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Well, just to the professor's last point, as I've said about 4 or 5 times, the UCs lead the country in admission of disadvantaged students. The notion that it's this enclave of affluent, white elitists is just not true. There is a university, a public university in this country that matches, there may be a couple lower tier ones, of anywhere close to the caliber of the UCs that matches its outreach to disadvantaged students, number one. Number two, to Henry's point, if they put the word quota in there, they'd have to be dumber than they seem. You know, you don't put quota in the bill. You also have to be rocket science to figure out what the underlying intent of this bill is. And finally, as to the politics of it, I don't know what animated Senator Hernandez to do with this year, but this bill has been enacted before. It was passed in the prior session, and the only reason it didn't become law is because Governor Brown saw it as being crazy. So instead of having to get vetoed again by Governor Brown, they made it into a constitutional amendment. And it's the politics are kind of mind-blowing, but in any event, it's been around before. I don't think Senator Hernandez had any notion, since there was no resistance the first time around when it was passed by both houses of the legislature, he kind of assumed that there wouldn't be any resistance this time. And having had lunch last week with a Chinese-American legislator, he said there was no whisper of opposition until a couple of weeks ago. Well, I think the tide has turned, and people realize that this is not going to pass like a knife through butter, and it's a very bad idea.